We control the entire experience from online return exchange to shipment back from the retailer. And controlling that experience with technology allows us to understand where every item is and is supposed to be in that process, creating a level of control and accuracy unrivaled in the marketplace.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in and being here. My name's Alice Gividen. I'm the Senior Strategist at BOF. Welcome to today's BOF Live. It's great to see so many of you joining already. The chat function is on, so please say hi, connect with one another, let us know where you're tuning in from, etc. Today, we're going to dive into the complex world of returns. This is a pain point for many brands and retailers, really regardless of size, of scope, of price point, where you sit within the market. And in fact, I mean, you could even argue that for the last 2 decades, maybe even longer, we've seen a race to the bottom as brands and retailers have started to compete to offer their customers the cheapest, the most convenient shopping experiences. And online shopping, which, as we all know, saw considerable growth during the pandemic, has a much higher return rate than in-store purchases. And while the logistical and environmental cost is taking its toll, many fear that if you take away these easy returns, you're going to lose customers. And they really do have good reason to be worried. There's a 2021 survey by Klarna that found that almost 60% of respondents would never buy from a retailer that charged for returns. Additionally, a consumer report conducted by research firm TRC and commissioned by PayPal, actually just released this morning, says that nearly 90% of shoppers say free returns are an important consideration when shopping online. And over 50% have abandoned a cart and just walked away due to a lack of a convenient return method. So what all of this really tells us is that today, for brands and for retailers, no matter your market positioning, optimizing this process is not only critical to retaining customers, it can actually help you acquire new ones as well. So to really unpack all of this and to explore that relationship between returns and growth and investing in returns, I'm so delighted to welcome 2 experts in this space. Andrew Pease, who is the Senior Director of Growth at PayPal, Happy Returns. Andrew, it is such a pleasure to have you with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, Happy Returns is an e-commerce returns company launched in 2015 and was acquired by PayPal last year. And what it offers is an in-person aggregated return service through a network of brick and mortar locations across the US. And, you know, it's impressive. 80% of the American population live within a 10-mile radius of a return bar. And it has a huge range of clients: Gymshark, Levi's, Revolve, and Everlane, among many more. And joining him is the wonderful consumer psychologist and founder of behavioral retail consultancy, Humanising Brands, Kate Nightingale. Kate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited for this discussion.
Me too. Thank you so much. And Kate advises global brands on everything from brand strategy, customer experience, and she lectures in consumer psychology and behavior as well. So before we get started, just as a really small bit of housekeeping, if you'd like to ask Andrew or Kate a question, the Q&A button in your toolbar will send them straight through and we'll do our best to make time for them. And finally, just if you need any help at all, our customer support team is available via the chat as BOF events. So to kick things off, I'd really love to give everyone tuning in a bit of an overview of the flaws within the existing returns landscape. You know, how have we ended up in such a tricky and nuanced position? Andrew, I'd love to begin with you. What factors do you believe have contributed to returns becoming such a pain point for brands today?
Yeah, so it's 2 key things, right? It is consumer expectation and purchasing decision-making combined with costs. So if we start with the first one, bracketing is a massive change in consumer adoption, right? Of how people purchase online. They are now using their closet at home as their own personal showroom. They're trying on things and then they're sending back what they don't like. And it is, you know, a significant amount of consumers doing that today, and it's only going to grow over time because the population under 45 has massively adopted this, and they're only going to continue to grow with that. On the flip side, you've got carrier costs massively increasing. Everyone has probably seen the increases in FedEx announcements. Their GRI is an extra couple points above last year. And as those continue to grow, the cost of those free returns, which consumers feel like are so important, get really, really hard. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the world of e-commerce was actually never built for returns. It was built as a forward-moving service from a 3PL perspective. And so most 3PLs are not very good at doing returns in the same way that they're great at doing outbound processing. And so what that creates is, especially during peak times, massive delays in refund approval, which creates massive customer call volume, because 72% of shoppers on average have contacted the merchant's customer service team to help with the return. That's absolutely massive weight that's being put on your customer service team because of things like, where is my refund?
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost feels like a situation that is really beyond brand control, or very easy to allow it to kind of become beyond brand control. And thinking about that, Kate, I think a lot of this has to do with customer mindset, and consumers' approach to returns. How has the mindset changed, particularly post-pandemic? What do consumers expect from returns today?
So first of all, we need to understand that for consumers, things around the returns are generally a pain point, and a pain point that obviously from the brand point of view can very negatively impact on the overall relationship, the trust, and therefore the long-term customer value. Now, the reason it is a pain point, sometimes it's because simply a brand makes it a pain point, such as makes the difficulty in the return process, or like you, Andrew, indicated, simple things like I can't find information about the return, or the speed of the refund and things like that. But sometimes the simple act of returning something, it's already a hassle, but also is something that, you've already connected and attached yourself emotionally to that product because you already touched it. So there's, for example, interesting studies that showcase that the simple act of touching a product already increases a sense of ownership over that product by over 20%. Now, needless to say, Apple, for example, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to kind of have their MacBooks kind of just open about 30% in the stores. So when you kind of have to touch it, you already kind of attach yourself emotionally. So that almost like ripping part of your identity as well, which obviously I'm not going to blame myself for that. I'm going to blame the brand, right? So that also trickles into the trust and into the relationship. Now, if a brand also makes it difficult, as opposed to easy, I'm not talking frictionless. I'm talking easy, simple, good, but still with meaning attached to it. Then obviously that is going to be less painful. Now, our brain is wired to avoid pain and approach pleasure, right? So if we can, make sort of not only returns much easier, but we can perhaps maybe introduce forms of pleasure through gamification, or kind of connecting it, for example, with some forms of additional experience or loyalty or anything else, then we starting to change the thinking around the return from the pain to this is a part of an experience, right? But we can kind of get to it a little bit later. But that simple form of pain stemming from the actual difficulty of an action and what follows later on, I'm not even talking about lack of certainty, the increased amount of risk that it's involved already with the purchase, and additionally with the lack of information around the return, like you were saying, Andrew, that kind of leads into heightened, overall uncertainty around the brand, which obviously trickles into trust and overall satisfaction, which then can lead to never coming back to the brand or at least coming back less frequently. So these are just kind of some things, which we just basically need to think about. So how can we remove pain or reduce it? And how can we perhaps introduce bits and pieces of pleasure in that section?
Absolutely.
If I
When
could
you
just
talk
add to that,
about,
those are,
sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just thinking, like, we add just a couple things on that. One thing that's changed, dramatically over the last few years is the ability to print and box and, print a label and box up items, right? Like, people do not have access to printers anymore on a daily basis. They're not in this, and now, especially as we move into the virtual world, people do not have printers at home. So they used to be able to print them in the office. Now they're not even coming into the office all the time to be able to print. So removing labels is a massive thing. And then the idea of boxing up something, taping it, all of that can dramatically make pain in the shopper experience. One of the reasons we exist as a company is about removing that friction point, right? When you have a box-free, label-free in-person return with an immediate refund, the consumer doesn't have to worry about all those little things they're going to have to do. And all of a sudden, that pain becomes, like we say, a delight. We try to make returns beautiful, right? And it's a very hard thing to do, to make something that should be seen as a negative a positive, but that's what our company focuses on a daily basis.
It's really interesting. Thinking sort of back to kind of the market context of kind of that surrounds returns, or certainly what kind of where we're at in the present day with people not really optimizing their return strategies. At BOF, Andrew, I'd love to pose this to you. We've reported a lot on the inventory glut that brands and retailers are experiencing this year. It's been pretty overwhelming. As of mid-July, so middle of the season, men's, women's, and children's apparel in the UK, more than 71% of products were marked down, like in the middle of the season. And that's compared to just 22% last year. And in the US, 60% of products marked down as well. Stuff isn't selling. And, do you think that poor handling of returns has kind of compounded this or played a part in this at all?
I don't know if the poor handling of return has played that part so much as there are knock-on effects in the cycle there, right? Inflation has impacted the way shoppers return, right? Our survey recently, revealed that shoppers under 45 are more likely to return an item because of economic pressures than they were previously. Yeah. They're just becoming much more picky about what they truly love. And because then that has the knock-on effect of, do you have a great return policy? All the other things of making them make that decision. If they know they're going to be picky, they're also going to be picky about making that purchase in general. So if you don't have a great return policy and great return options, they're going to say, nah, probably not going to buy that. I'm not going to take that chance. Mm-hmm. And so consumers tend to buy from the same sites over time. And it's the new sites, when they're trying to make a new site, it's, ooh, am I going to like that? If I don't like that, what happens? And so when they know it's going to be okay if they don't like it, they're much more inclined to purchase it. So I would say that does have something to do with the glut that we're seeing. The other thing that happens with glut is you end up actually having these giant sales, like you mentioned, these giant markdowns that happen. What happens when you have giant sales or giant promotions is actually a massive increase in adoption, but then a massive increase in returns that come with that, right? And so you get these really spiky peaks of return volume that are very, very hard to manage at your warehouse, because instead of having, oh, it's Christmas time, we're normally staffed for this, you're doing this in June, you're doing this in September, you're doing this probably in November because you're moving Black Friday all the way up to the beginning of the year. To the beginning of the month. All of those things really make it hard for your warehouse operations to do that. And so having returns come back in a systematic function in nice clean pallets, rather than just mail coming at you every single day, can also help your warehouse deal with the fact that they may not have a lot of room to maneuver in their warehouse, because you mentioned their inventory levels are higher as well. And so having it be easy to put those returns to the side and know that the consumer's gotten that refund and you don't actually have to process them right now is a huge benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, just to quickly respond also to that question, I did find some interesting studies that specifically kind of compared customers that were returning versus those that weren't returning, while still were active in a 12 months before and 12 months after the return. And they were specifically studying the speed of refund. And generally what they found is that those customers that were returning an item and the speed of refund was quite quick, they actually have been shown to have a higher order frequency, higher average number of items per order purchased, and higher average item value compared to the customers that did not make a return. So actually a really good return experience, just a simple stuff like speed of refund, like what you said, Andrew, refund immediately, can actually make people buy more later on. It's like, that's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so super counterintuitive, right? Which is that your best shoppers are often your highest returners. And I think brands often have that's a cognitive dissonance. It's very hard for them to get over. Yeah. But it's really important for them to recognize, because those shoppers have the highest long-term value, right? Of any shopper they have.
I'd love to kind of double click into consumers a little bit, because clearly this just has so much to do with the customer mindset, consumer psyche around returns, all these things we've just been teeing up. So Kate, I mean, I'd really love to begin with you. When we think about customer attitudes to returns, are there generational differences that you've seen? Are certain cohorts of customers more likely to return things? Are there spaces where it's more prevalent? Just based on your insights and your research and your work.
So obviously, I'm sure Andrew has some really cool stats, but just basing it on things like identity development. So generally, up until the age of 25, our identity isn't fully formed. What that simply means is those younger individuals are going to be trying on different skins, basically. So they will be continuously changing their outfits. They're going to see kind of how the social groups are reacting to them, whether they like themselves or not, and all this kind of basic kind of forms of identity development. Now, what that simply means, they're amazing customers because their frequency of buying is much bigger than, those with a developed identity. But obviously, as Andrew said, more often than not, that would mean also higher returns. Now, if you're already quite settled in the way you express your identity and your personality, then obviously you are going to be much less likely to be a frequent buyer and a frequent returner, right? Now, those things obviously are going to still differ based on other aspects like personality characteristics. So, for example, individuals with a higher openness to experiences, which is one of the 5 dimensions of Big 5 personality model. So basically, there's 5 key dimensions that we can assess our personality on, will generally like to try new things all the time. Now, they're extremely difficult customers to keep loyal. But they are the ones that will, for example, pick up trends much more often, and therefore will kind of be more frequent buyers. But needless to say, they can therefore be a more frequent returners, or perhaps also a more likely candidate for a resale market. So just basic things like that, as well as 500 other aspects of our psyche, can considerably influence that, rather than necessarily particular, age groups, because they're less of a defining factor than some of the psychological differences.
When thinking particularly about trends and this kind of, frequent buyers and the kind of this fast-paced purchasing, Andrew, you mentioned bracketing earlier. This is something we've discussed before, but there might be some people on the call that don't know what bracketing is. Could you explain a little bit to the community today what bracketing is, and how brands can kind of navigate it, if it's something that's going to be unlearned by consumers, maybe how important you think it is going forwards?
Yeah, sure. So there's 2 basic types of bracketing, and then there's the hardcore bracketing. I'll talk about the basic types first, then we can talk about the hardcore one later. The 2 basic types of bracketing are size bracketing and color bracketing. So say I want a pair of shoes, it's very hard to know if that is actually a 10 or a 9 or an 8 or a 7, right? Like it's very hard to know where you fit, like, because shoes are all, they all say they're 10s, but we all know they're not all the same, right? Not every 10 is built the same. And so the consumer will often buy the one below and the one higher, similar in a dress size. If it's a size 7, they'll buy a 6, 7, 8, right? And because they want to make sure that the one they do end up getting will work, and because they do want to have that purchase to wear and try on, but they're not sure, right, what it's going to look like. And so that's kind of the other one. The other one would be color, which is like, I really love this dress, but I'm not sure if it'll look good on me in green or blue or red until I see it in front of a mirror. And so if you just do that permutation box, that's 9 potential options, right? It's just 3 sizes and the 3 colors. Yeah. So you can get just 9 brackets on that side alone. Then there's kind of the more hardcore bracketing of, I just don't know what I really want. Like, I really want to treat this like a department store. I want to go in and buy a bunch of different things and try a bunch on, and maybe I'll keep 4 of them of the 10, maybe I'll return 5. I mean, this practice is becoming more common in the US, but it's already like table stakes in Germany as an example. Like, try before you buy is the mantra that Zalando, in fact, pretty much invented, and made use of in Germany as well. And that mentality is coming over to America, significantly, and the UK, and it's only going to grow, right? So there's nothing you can really do to change this. This is the consumer new way of working, and it's only going to get bigger this holiday season. It's actually going to go from like 40% people saying they plan to do it in the next year to 60% saying they actually plan to do it this holiday, right? And so that massive change of holiday peaks when they're doing this is a big pain point for merchants.
I'd actually love to stick with you, Andrew, to think about, Happy Returns has a wealth of consumer insight, thanks to all of your merchant partners, the independent research that you do and that you create. What trends are you seeing at Happy Returns around the way in which consumers are actually liking to return items? In pandemic, we talked a lot about BOPUS and Boris. Is that still true? Do they want flexibility and convenience? What are you seeing from consumers today?
Yeah, at the end of the day, consumers want choice, but most likely they want that choice that is going to be the most convenient and the most sustainable options. Both the Happy Returns network, which is returning in person to a third-party solution, as well as buy online, return in store. If you have, if you're a merchant that has lots of stores, both of those are by far the most convenient as well as the most sustainable options that you can offer to a consumer. And so having that is absolutely critical. Mail returns are pretty much dead. And in fact, what we're seeing is that at-home pickup is still less desirable, just due to the worries about, if I put it out on my doorstep, is it going to get stolen? Do I have to wait and hand this thing off to the person? It's a little complicated, as opposed to, I'm going to do an errand out, I'll drop this off while I'm there. It's a super easy experience. I'm going to get my immediate refund. Like everything that Happy Returns is based on the ideas that come out of consumers really want to do buy online, return in store, but most merchants do not have the store count that's convenient enough for all of their customer base to service that. So even merchants that have 500 stores, right? When you compare 500 stores to 5,000 locations, that's a big difference. Now the consumer is going to go and drop off at that store first if it's convenient to them and easy, but you want to make sure that you give your entire breadth of locations that ability. Even large brick and mortar merchants that have 1,000+ return options as their stores still offer mail, as an example, right? Because they know they have to offer the mail or other drop-off locations. Otherwise, the consumers are not going to buy online.
So it's clear that customers need choice and they need convenience, and clearly a huge range of choice. But Kate, to round out this section, looking into customers and returns and that relationship, I know you do a huge amount of research and work into customer behavior. how can we engage a more thoughtful response to returns from consumers? How can we kind of educate them? What role can brands play? Where do we even really begin?
So obviously the strategies will differ depending on a brand, right? Because, for some brands, like Andrew said, the aspect of control that we have thanks to the choice are going to be much more important. For others, for example, an ability to bring that customer into our physical locations are going to be much more impactful, because some other pieces of research that I looked at previously on some project have showcased that customers that kind of generally kind of do click and collect or kind of do returns in person in the stores tend to kind of on average 50% of those customers will buy something additionally. But, one thing that we even discussed, Alice, earlier is that returns are not only associated with pain, they're also associated with guilt.
Yes.
Because, we all kind of, as retailers, as brands, as industry generally communicated, oh, it's so bad for the environment and it's so costly and it's whatever else. And it's not really good to kind of, showcase to everyone else kind of theoretically that you're returning. And more importantly, if you look at where is the return center in the store, it's usually somewhere in a dirty basement or somewhere really difficult upstairs. It's super ugly, has no branding on it, has terrible customer service and everything on top of it, right? Why? Why do you kind of give me that level of guilt additionally while I already have heavy amounts of pain, while I already have to go out of my way to actually return it because you only gave me 1 or 2 options to do that as opposed to 5, and interestingly, I've been looking at a recent study as well that showcased that we don't actually have a choice paralysis. It seems like we don't have enough choice. That's at least what the customers are showcasing at the moment in that research. And it doesn't matter whether we're looking at fashion or whether we're looking at automotive, different kind of sectors have shown exactly the same, that customers feel they have too little choice. Now, it's not necessarily that we have too little products or we that give them too little choice to actually return. It's more how we communicate it, how we give them a control over that process, and how we make them experience a brand. Because let's face it, it is an add-on service. The same way as tailoring or personalization could be, why don't we make it a service that feels amazing, that talks about the story? Forbid you also think about circularity of that, communication over there, because what happens with that return? Because let's face it, Andrew, you probably have a stat. How many of the returns you're not able to sell and just lands and then goes in the landfill? Do you have that stat?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually from the apparel side, most things end up getting refulfilled as opposed to that, but there is a massive amount of waste in returns, especially on the things like the Amazon side of the house and, and areas in that. And the consumer mindset a lot is that it's getting thrown out when actually the retailers are actually doing their level best to make sure they can get that stuff in stock. Now, there may be an inventory glut, and even though that stuff got back in stock, it doesn't sell. That's a totally separate problem, right, that we have, which is overbuying of inventory in general and not having real-time, production to fit our needs. That's kind of a big giant issue from the beginning of the phase. But I would say retailers are doing their level best to ensure that they get everything back in stock and ready to ship as possible on the return side.
Yeah. Because let's also think about return. Obviously, it's part of the post-purchase. And let's face it, a lot of the times, we still don't pay as much of an attention into the customer experience on a post-purchase level. And okay, let's compare it to that. Our brain sees brands as human beings. This is literally how psychological and neuroscientific research has indicated that this is how we view brands. We view them as human beings. We therefore create human-like relationships with the brands. So how would you feel if you'd gone out on a date, slept with someone, and then they didn't call you back? Yeah. It's kind of the same thing, this is a post-purchase experience. Do you want it to be amazing? Do you want to accentuate your values? Do you want to make them feel special? Or do you want to just give them pain and guilt everywhere? Like, what do you think is going to guarantee you heightened loyalty and heightened customer, lifetime value? I don't think it's a rocket science. Everyone can figure that out, right?
Absolutely. This is actually a perfect segue, really thinking about returns as a cohesive part of your brand or an extension of your brand identity, to really think about returns and meaningful growth for your business. Returns has the potential, if invested in correctly, to be big business. Andrew, let's start with you. How big is this sort of opportunity for brands? What can you kind of share with us about, why this is actually an important aspect of your business to really invest in and to leverage?
Yeah, I mean, to Kate's point, it's absolutely massive, right? And this is why we're in this business, because it's an absolutely massive opportunity for us. So when you look at it, kind of there's about 5 key things that we talk about in terms of improving your returns experience from from an opportunity perspective. Shopper loyalty and lifetime value, right? People who have great returns experience become great return buyers. That's easy, right? Cost reduction, massive opportunities to reduce your costs in this thing by changing and thinking about doing something new instead of just the old way of, put it in a box, tape it up and send it back by mail. Revenue retention, focusing on important ways to get exchanges. Most of the time, the consumer wanted to buy something, right? And so making sure they have the opportunity to do a quick and easy exchange for that thing that didn't work out. Say they didn't bracket, right? And they only bought one and they said it didn't fit. Offering them the next size up or the next size below, really, really important to maybe collect that sale, right? And then sustainability, right? Being able to have a message around sustainability, around returns is absolutely critical for the consumer today. They are looking for that. And like I said, they know that dropping off in person is going to help with that sustainability. And so having something that can address that is incredibly important. And then, like I mentioned on the customer service side, right? We helped one single merchant reduce their returns related customer service contacts by 80%. And return customer service contacts are the second largest customer service contact after where is my order? So there's 2 big things. Where is my order and where is my refund, right? Or what's wrong with my return? Why isn't it working? What's going on, right? Yeah. 80% reduction of that is absolutely massive. So taking that weight off your team and knowing that when you're taking that weight off your team, you are actually also increasing your NPS score. So our lifetime NPS score is a 93. Is that because consumers hate doing it the other way a lot? Probably as well, but like I said, we do make returns as beautiful as possible for the consumer, and they really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, totally. I've actually just seen a question come in that I just wanted to pose to you because it's coming from Raphael. And I think we can't really talk about returns without talking about this new strategy. And he's mentioned, that Zara and Uniqlo have recently started to make customers pay for returns. And, we said these stats at the beginning, it's meant to really dissuade customers from shopping in the first place. But obviously, Zara and Uniqlo have huge scale advantage. Andrew, maybe if we come to you first, but Kate, please feel free to chip in. Yeah, do you think this is going to pick up globally as a trend?
So there's a very important delineation there, right? Zara only charges for returns if you send them back by mail. If you go and do a return in person at a Zara store, it's free. So what Zara is doing is saying, I will give you guys free returns. And because I'm Zara, I have so many locations that are in general convenient, right? But if you do the more expensive method and the least sustainable method, you're going to have to pay for it because I can only offer you, free returns for the best and cheapest service. Yeah. So we actually have a lot of merchants on our side where Happy Returns drop off is free, but the mail is charged for. And because Happy Returns is so convenient, that's okay, right? It's okay to be able to say to your consumer, yeah, I'm going to charge you for this mail if you don't want to use one of 5,000 plus locations across America. That's an easy sell to the consumer. They understand that. And so you have the legitimacy to say returns are free while still recouping costs of the more expensive decision-making process.
Interesting. Kate, when we think about a return strategy, how do you think brands can make returns more thoughtful and engaging? We've talked about that idea of not being like shunted and having quite like a guilty experience where you're kind of sent to a basement to return a product and you feel pretty miserable and you wait in line for ages. So on the flip side of that, you know, how can we make this a more thoughtful and engaging experience for customers?
So just very quickly to Andrew's point, it's the actual act of charging for the return is sensed as a punishment. Now, we obviously don't want a punishment. We want, we want a reward. Now, that does not necessarily mean that a brand can't adopt that strategy, because obviously strategy of returning in store, as we said, can lead to additional sales and is generally cheaper in terms of the logistics and everything else. But it's the matter of framing it as well. So which of that information we are actually indicating first, therefore which one we encouraging, because generally if you first communicate, oh, you can return free by Happy Returns, and kind of third option down the road is you can return by mail and blah, 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 and pay for it, then the perception of the brand is going to be much more positive than if we focus even on the second or first option, in that kind of chargeable aspect. Because then what we're doing is we not only punishing an individual for an actual return, but we also indicating the level of cost, even environmental cost and everything else. Oh my goodness, forbid you also put a CO2 kind of benefit or cost, next to that return options. That would be like even worse. But that kind of, that aspect of framing. Now, a little bit coming back to kind of the tactics that we can kind of reduce the returns, because, it's like I forgot to mention some of the stuff, and also someone asked. Now, first of all, representativeness. Most of the models, no one can relate to them, right? So how am I supposed to know whether a product will actually fit me or not? Let's face it, majority of the individuals have absolutely no clue about how product, behaves on the body or whatever else. They have no understanding of materials, how it, of the pattern cutting or anything like that. Therefore, automatically that level of of lack of kind of knowledge and education in that sphere is going to automatically lead to higher returns. However, if we have a heightened representativeness of different body shapes, different heights, different gender identities, different ways of wearing the same product, so for example, you can even use things like user-generated content, which a lot of brands tend to kind of use as well on their product pages. And that automatically is going to allow people not only to connect more strongly with the brand in general, but also imagine themselves much better in that product, how they can also, style it with the rest of the products in their, in their wardrobe, which automatically, even if the product won't fit perfectly, they will already be so attached to the product because they already kind of run a whole movie in their head on how they're going to wear that product in which situation, that they so connected it already with their identity that it's going to be harder for them to return it, even if maybe they, need to adjust something on it. So that's obviously one of those things. Obviously, virtual try-on and, those kind of pieces of information, as well as key information about the measurement, those are all things that definitely are going to help. Now, in terms of the strategies of making the returns much easier, what you said, Andrew, convenience, something that's super close to my, to my house. Something where I don't have to back it up. Oh my goodness, that would be amazing. Love it. That's great. Unless it's obviously the package that already kind of I had. Obviously if it's things that are heavy, not possible. But, that level of choice and how we kind of frame that choice in the returns, that's going to be the crucial element. So I feel really good about that return. And then obviously if I choose to return in a physical space, making that an additional amazing experience and an opportunity to communicate further about the brand. And those will be like really the basic stuff that you should be focusing on. Everything else, that will be just beautiful decoration.
Yeah.
And if I can just add on that real quick, Alice, I mean, you talked about the experience and the presentation, right? And that's why it's really critical that you have an awesome return flow. as part of your e-commerce site, right? So when the consumer is going through and clicking that button to start that return, that is a very easy, simple solution that is directing you with the right marketing messages and the right understanding of what you want to do. That's going for exchanges, that's trying all of that. Obviously, that is one thing that we do really well as well, because not only do we operate this 5,000 return bar network, we have best in class return flow software that any startup can use. And so it's really important that they do that, have that integrated directly into their OMS, and really make it simple and easy for the consumer to use. If you have a bad flow up front, it doesn't matter how good the next experience is going to be, because the pain of the consumer just getting to that, like if they have to contact and send an email to customer service to do a return, or those kinds of things, like it's look at Kate's I think Kate just flames just erupted from Kate thinking about sending an email to customer service, right?
Andrew, on that note, do you have some really cool stats around branded return kind of, questionnaire or survey or whatever else versus, for example, the delivery kind of partner? Because from what I kind of saw, some anecdotal evidence at least, it seems like the branded ones is actually much more impactful in terms of enhancing the brand perception and loyalty. But please correct me if I'm wrong, if you have some other cool stats around that.
100%. Every single return portal that exists should be merchant branded. There is no reason that consumer should think that they are leaving that world that exists. Now, when it comes to carrier drop off, that brand goes away, right? Because then it becomes the carrier's brand that's important, which is like, are we going to Happy Returns? Are we going to FedEx? Like that becomes the new brand for drop off, and it's association there at that point. But up front, if you're using a portal that does not have your brand and your ethos front and center for that return experience, you're completely missing out on a massive chance to continue to reinforce the value and add content of your brand to that consumer during that experience. And that's where exchange is coming, right? Because if you're not branded, if you're not branded, you can't really offer a great exchange experience if don't have a branded solution, right? And so you lose out all of that as well. And that's something that I think more and more brands are getting towards, which is we really, really need to have a great exchange experience.
And I was also wondering about kind of managing expectations, right? Because, a lot of that kind of relationship with returns is very much about risk and uncertainty expectation, which unfortunately is the first things our brain immediately thinks about when we're thinking return, right? So it's almost like, okay, great. So we have the immediate return, but I'm like almost the level of kind of frequency or type of communication that needs to happen in that process of returning. So great. So here is a notification that you got your refund, but we still kind of have this like, has the package arrived? Is it all good? Am I going to be charged again or whatever? Have they liked it? Have I not destroyed whatever, right? So like, what have you seen, Andrew, on that side? Because I'm really intrigued on that stats.
Yeah, so as long as the consumer has gotten their refund, they believe problem solved, right? And so if the merchant can make that as soon as possible, they know their refund is approved. Unlike Amazon, you don't have that same experience where you may drop it off and get a provisional refund, and then later on they're gonna take it back. Because with our service, as an example, we do the visual inspection at the location itself and say, yes, those are these two items that you're getting. We're able to say to that retailer, you have legitimate reason to provide them with this immediate refund and not worry that something different is going to come back, a material amount of the time. And so that's absolutely critical in that. The consumer wants that problem solved. Once they've dropped that off, they don't want to ever worry about it again. That's why you get those calls to customer service if you don't have this solution, right? That's why you get all this pain. That's why you get the he said, she said of, oh, the package never arrived. Well, the carrier must have lost it. Well, whose fault is that, right? That, you don't want to be in that solution, because the minute you reject a refund for a consumer where it's reasonable, they're going to never use your brand again, because you're effectively firing that customer because they feel like they did everything right. And then you say, you still got to pay for this thing. And now they don't even have it back. They're never going to get that item back that they paid for. What a horrible experience, right? Getting the refund up front, not worrying about that as a consumer, massive for both sides of the equation.
We're actually getting a lot of questions kind of coming in, so many, but a lot around, just before we move on to kind of looking at environmental impact and returns and that relationship and boosting sustainability, just to close out operational and stuff and growth. So many questions from the community who have smaller brands, maybe they're digital pure plays, smaller luxury brands, and so on. And I think they want to understand a little bit about how they can handle customer returns. You know, if they're just beginning to, they're startups or they're just beginning to scale their business, how do they begin? How should they begin and what should they start with? Andrew, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, so like I said, it all starts with having that software up front, right? Have that great software up front, your return flow, make that experience awesome. Mm-hmm. Then make sure that translates to drop off, right? Reduce your cost significantly of the mail, because especially when you're a small company, you don't have a lot of negotiation power on the mail. So one, get a return portal that has great rates they can offer you as part of that. And then next to that, try to avoid those rates altogether by using a solution that's even cheaper, like a return bar solution, right? Those are absolutely critical, right? Yeah. And you know, you still have to offer mail for people that want that method, but you can, you know, one, you pay a lot less for it in general because the adoption rates are very high when people choose Happy Returns. Our adoption rate when mail and Happy Returns are side by side with each other is over 70% for Happy Returns. Yeah. So imagine your entire cost base flipping from the most expensive solution 100% of the time to the least expensive solution 70% of the time. That's absolutely massive, right? And I think that messaging, like Kate talked about on the environment, not necessarily going as far as CO2 messaging, but making sure people know what the green option is. And, and that, the only reason I say not so far, because it's really hard to do. That's why. But talking about the green options, talking about your maintaining your sustainability, as well as having a really clear return policy that's very easy to find. Because if a customer can't find an easy return policy, they're never going to get to this point where you get to the flow, because they're not going to buy in the first place, right? And so if they don't have a great return policy right there and there that's been talked to them almost by an expert, and we have great templates for this as an example of like, this is what a return policy should look like and explain it, the consumer's just not going to buy in the first place.
I'd actually like to move on ever so slightly, really, to our final topic. I've seen so many questions. I think it's something that's in the back of consumers' minds, certainly in the back of brands' minds. It's really around the idea that in putting a lot of the things that we've discussed into action, investing in your return strategy, brands and retailers can actually lessen their environmental impact if they streamline those processes, if they do these things. You know, it is well known the fashion industry is incredibly wasteful. The Fashion Transparency Index found that only 14% of major fashion brands are even publishing the quantity of products they produce. So we have no idea how many clothes are even out there, let alone that flow of being, bracketed, bought and returned. And this lack of disclosure is masking the true picture of not only an overproduction problem, but just how much is out there. And, combine that with no control on returns for certain brands. That's pretty serious. Andrew, can we start with you? As operating more responsibly becomes actually a really critical consideration from regardless of where you sit, your price point, where you sit in the market, how actually can investing in returns help to support that mission? I'd love to start there.
Yeah, so a couple key things, right? So shoppers really do now, more than any time ever, associate the brands that share their own values, right? In terms of what they want to go for. And so we actually looked at a recent study, and it said that 41% of shoppers actually said they pay more for a more sustainable return method, right? And so so shoppers are willing to pay more even up front for that good. And I'm sure Kate can talk about that more than I can, right? In terms of like, if you can say your brand is sustainable, you're actually able to charge more for that, for that item, on its own face, right? And the same goes for this returns process. If they believe the entire process is more sustainable, they're much more likely to buy and much more likely to feel okay about paying a little bit more upfront. So not only is it not a net loss to you, it can become a net positive, right? I think the other thing that gets lost in sustainability is a lot of people think sustainability has to cost more. Sustainability should be cheaper if you're doing it right. That's the whole point of sustainability. Using recycled materials should be cheaper, right? Aggregation should be cheaper. And so driving to the right way of being sustainable that actually is also cheaper for you, where you can reduce costs and help the environment, is absolutely massive. And that's one of the reasons we have our return bar experience as well. And I hate to keep harping on it, but it's kind of my job. It's, you get that win-win, right? Which is I can reduce the costs, improve my customer experience, and help the environment through aggregation. You don't normally get all of those things, right?
Yeah, no, you don't.
So
you definitely don't.
I think brands need to figure out, how can I, across all of my chain, how can I make sustainability a real cost savings?
At Happy Returns, actually, how are you investing in boosting sustainability efforts further? I presume this is an important focal point. What are you focusing on at the moment?
Yeah, so we focus a lot on making sure we're always shipping to the closest destination from our return bars, make sure we have the right warehouses, making sure we're doing the right level of aggregation and automation to reduce waste, making sure we're not adding more bags to the equation than are needed, right? Making sure that those bags are sustainable, right? And so every time we look across our chain, making sure that we choose that sustainable option, again, somewhat selfishly, because usually it is the more cost-effective option, especially when you come to reusable items. So every tote that gets shipped from Return Bar, as an example, is a reusable tote. So we actually have effectively a milk run that goes from our warehouses back to those locations that refills them with fresh totes all the time, rather than cardboard boxes, again, getting boxed up and taped and shipped and everything like that are going to get thrown out at the end. We have these beautiful reusable boxes that get used over 100 times. And so when you actually talk about the cost impact of that, right, they are a fifth of the cost of a cardboard box, right? That's amazing, right? To be a fifth and reduce the weight on the environment is absolutely fantastic.
Kate, I'd love to come back to you because of all of your knowledge on, on consumer convenience. How can brands work to align that idea of convenience and choice and giving all the options and all the experiences to the customer with inherently more sustainable or more thoughtful practices? Can they complement each other?
You certainly can, but we obviously at this very interesting time where the ideas of sustainability are changing considerably, and the demands from the customers around sustainability are also becoming more of a demands that are hygiene and default factors. To the point that, considering as well the introduction of a cost of living crisis and an upcoming recession, there is this kind of question of, do we actually want to pay a premium anymore? All right. And there is a lot of question and more kind of recent discussions, like, I even just had last week with some retailers, and actual behavioral evidence also showcasing that customers don't actually care about sustainability. Now, if you package up that sustainability into some other motivations and some other drivers, like I can be part of the community, or I can showcase how great I am, by saving a dolphin while choosing this return method as opposed to another, so some form of kind of social acceptance and, and social representation, for example, then those kind of motivations are more of a driving force for you choosing the more sustainable option than anything else. But that level of where we are still okay to a certain degree, not obviously every customer type, but some customers are still okay to pay some level of a premium, that I believe, from what I can see where things are going, it's going to go away. So I really liked your comment, Andrew, where actually I'm really looking forward to changing that subconscious associations with sustainability towards it should be cheaper because it lasts longer, because it's better, because it's, not necessarily cheaper as a product, but cheaper in a wider section. Now, People, however, are very terrible in counting a long-term impact or a long-term benefit or value of something. So they're not going to understand that their product costs X per wear. Nah, that doesn't work. So it's not going to, go to that. And also, if you look at it, especially online shopping, it's a zombie activity. Now, what I mean by that is an activity pretty much entirely conducted by your subconscious brain, meaning you do this. Now, what you're asking people to do is suddenly to turn on the conscious thinking and a rational calculation and understand mathematical equations and figure out what's going to happen with that product in a year and a half. I'm sorry, but that's way too much hassle for me, right? So the challenge with that is to introduce certain small frictions in the process of buying, which are not difficult and are not meaningless. So I don't believe in a frictionless experience. Now, the reason why I don't believe in a frictionless experience, it is a non-event for the brain. It did not happen. I did not even register it because I did not pay attention to it. That zombie even did not pay attention to it. It literally didn't happen. It didn't kind of at all made me, excited by even a fraction, of it. Now, we need a friction, but we need what I like to call a meaningful friction rather than a meaningless friction. So the meaningless friction is what we already discussed for the last 50 minutes, everything that creates pain. But we can have a meaningful friction, such as, can I see a user-generated content, about that product? Such as, can I see, a positive environmental impact? Such as, give me a content on how I can use that same jacket in 5 different ways. That is still a friction because you're increasing the amount of time I need to spend on your platform and increasing the amount of time that happens before I actually add something in a basket. But what happens? I am way more certain of that product. I am actually already more emotionally engaged with the product. The same thing as I was, for example, talking about the representativeness. All of that happens. What is going to happen? You are much more likely to buy that product, first of all, and much less likely to return it later on. Needless to say, the side effect of it is lower environmental costs, plus all the other strategies that we were talking about. Now, definitely do not use guilt. Definitely do not use shame. Please stop doing that. That doesn't work. Introduce tiny, subtle, changes into, okay, this is sustainable. Oh, it's fun as well. Great. Oh, let's do some gamification strategy. Let's do some rewards on top of it. It's also sustainable. Great, lovely. Make me feel better on top of it, right? Sustainability, it's not something that is the first, third, or even sometimes fifth driving force. Give me belongingness, give me a reward, make me feel amazing as a person, notice me. I also saved the dolphin. Lovely, great. I'm feeling so amazing. Of course, I'm going to add this to the basket as well. That is the benefit. So, yes, introduce that friction, but make it meaningful. Present your values, do other things around it, gamify it, whatever else, it actually going to pay off.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly good advice. And I can't believe it, but we literally have a minute left. I told you it would go quickly. There is so much to say on this topic. I want to thank you both so much for your insights. Andrew, just one final thing from you. What excites you for the future of this space? It's been historically really painful for businesses. We've talked about problems, we've talked about solutions, we've talked about next steps. What's exciting going forwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the growth of our company and the growth of what we're doing, that leads me to the excitement of that merchants and retailers are understanding this, right? They're understanding the ways that they can fix this problem. It's not, they don't have their head buried in the sand anymore. This isn't 2018. The pandemic, in a way, made people wake up to what returns are and how they can make them change and how they can make them beautiful, right? As opposed to the negative experience. And so what I'm seeing is lots of focus on how do I retain revenue through exchanges? How do I make a really great friction-free experience on the return side, if not the purchase side, to Kate's point? how do I, make it sustainable? All of those things are really, really changing. And as you add, the great thing about this is it's like a community, right? Because the more merchants that ride on the same rails together, the better it gets for everyone. The cheaper everything gets for everyone, right? And so the more we can add into this awesome experience that we have, and the more merchants adopt it, the better everything gets for everybody. The more sustainable everything becomes, the more locations we can have. It's a big, giant virtue circle, right? And so that's what really excites me, is there's a lot of opportunity here, and there's a lot of opportunity internationally for this business as well, and the way that this same approach can resonate internationally.
I think that's a really nice optimistic note to end on. And that really brings us to the end of today's live. Andrew and Kate, I cannot thank you enough for all the wisdom you've shared. I've really learned so much, and I'm certain the BOF community has too, judging by the chat, the questions. I can see how engaged everyone was. So thank you so much for that. And just a reminder to today's audience, if you missed any part of today's conversation at all, it's available on YouTube immediately after we close. And just a huge thank you to our BOF events manager, Neve, who is behind the scenes, and she makes the process so slick and so easy. So thank you again, Andrew and Kate. And
thank you.
See you back on BOF Live.